costs being hiked to keep our cars on the road, and a warning tonight for driving.
Life goes up and it goes down. Life goes up and it goes down.
With build quality.
I wanted a cruiser class electric unicycle that was reliable and well built, and of course have fun along the way. The veteran Sherman S ticks a lot of these boxes, but it needed a lot of help to get there. So why am I left wanting more? I'm really excited to bring you this main review finally, and a big thank you to everyone who's joined me on the previous parts. They aren't necessary viewing, but just provide additional in-depth information on those topics. This comprehensive video is broken into two main parts. The ride review, which goes into how it feels to actually ride the wheel, and then the wheel review, which is more about living with it. Welcome everyone, I'm Jono, and let's start with how I chose the Sherman S. My first EUC was the InMotion V11, which I was very happy with. I rode it for about 8 months and 5,000 kilometers. However, I was constantly hitting tilt back and riding the beeps. Plus, I was getting a bit sick of charging after every single ride. I originally had a pre-order for InMotion V13, but changed my mind. This was for several reasons, but mainly that the 20-inch Sherman S seemed more practical. The veteran Sherman S has a very specific role in my PEV lineup. It is for mid to long range rides and replaces my car trips. For shorter rides, and when I don't want to gear up as much, I take my e-scooter, which is handy to hang groceries over the handlebars. And even my one-wheel pine. I just don't feel like putting all of my gear on for a shorter trip, such as 10 kilometers. It took me by surprise just how big, heavy and powerful the Sherman S was. This meant there was a significant learning curve and break-in period. I wasn't used to front power pads from my V11, so this was another thing that took me quite some time to get the hang of, but now I find it's essential. My initial impressions was that the Sherman S would make a very challenging first beginner wheel. I've done the majority of my riding on the street tyre, therefore I'll be focusing on how it rides with the street tyre. To see the off-road tyre in action, check out my previous video. A summary is that the Kenda K262 off-road tyre is a beast, meaning it's planted, stable and holds a straight line incredibly well. But that means it's reluctant to turn, and when it does, it falls into turns due to the tread pattern. Interestingly, rolling on the huge tread knobs dulls some of the road feel and provides a more floaty ride. The characteristics of the street tyre I love, and I find more enjoyable the round profile, which lends itself to nimbleness and agility. It rolls effortlessly from turn to turn. It also stands more upright throughout the turns, leading to a different cornering technique. It has the downside of transmitting more chatter from the road to your feet. So unless stated otherwise, for the rest of the video, I'll be talking about the Sherman S with the Michelin Pilot Street 2 tyre. I was a little bit surprised that such a large heavy wheel with high footplates could be ridden so slowly. It's possible to go walking speed on footpaths, although it does start to feel a bit unstable. I can also pull a tight U-turns in the width of a footpath. The off-road tyre just didn't feel right. Once I got the street tyre installed, all that cornering fun and carving joy came back. However, hard carving from side to side really highlights the weight of the wheel, and it felt a bit of a workout. This is partly because the Sherman S is so much faster than my V11, so the gyroscopic forces of the wheel are much higher to overcome. Arguably one of the best features is a collaboration between Fast A suspension and Leaperkim. So what does this mean for riding the wheel? I think it's best to show you what it has allowed me to do. This is my black diamond staircase. I haven't hit it yet on the V11, don't have the confidence, but maybe with the Sherman S, it'll be just fine with the stability and suspension. Holy shit, there we go. Did it. Bit sketchy, yeah, but cleared it. The first time I smashed across some grass, I was in disbelief at how fast and comfortable the suspension was. This kept the wheel planted and driving forwards pretty much the entire section. Keeping the wheel down and planted on the ground over bumps is undeniably a safety benefit over a non-suspension EUC. I railed these speed bumps while turning just to illustrate the confidence and traction from this suspension. Stairs are like nothing now, and I can even ride them seated. I didn't used to like hitting bumps or jumps, but because of the suspension, I've really started to enjoy it. So where does the magic come from? The suspension system is aligned with the wheel's direction of travel, and it doesn't have any linkages or pivot points that can create additional friction and points of failure.
A bit of friction. Like, that just won't work.
Stock suspension assembly is terrible. The geometry is just wrong for this type of application.
It's an oil-on-spring damped suspension. That's right, you'll never have to pump air into the suspension. Pretty much everything except the wheel is a sprung mass. With an aftermarket accessory for the adjuster knobs, I can reach down, stiffen the compression damping before hitting a jump, and then adjust it back to a cushy setting, all the while cruising at speed. Or if I head to an off-road track, I can speed up the rebound damping to compensate for the faster bumps. Once again, tool-free and without ever stepping off the EUC. So yeah, I'm happy. It's even better than I expected, and as for reliability and maintenance, I'll get to that later on. A large cruiser class EUC is so much fun to ride seated. It also allows for much longer sessions without taking a break. I immediately replaced the useless stock seat with my own DIY solution. This was a huge improvement, and I immediately started enjoying seated riding. I found that I was riding seated more often at higher speeds simply because of the wind resistance. Once you combine a cushy seat with the Sherman S suspension, holy crap, you can just ride for ages. Even with front power pads, I'm able to sit and stand without the use of the grab handle. However, it's so conveniently placed that I still sometimes use it just to be extra secure while transitioning positions. There is a pretty big downside, and that is braking while seated is terrible. And I need to use the grab handle to have any real effect. More on this in the upcoming braking section. I do find starting off in a seated position a bit tricky sometimes. I think this is due to the higher pedals and the weight of the EUC. Particularly difficult when I had the off-road tyre on, and generally far less control with it during seated riding. Power pads aren't optional on a large EUC like this, especially to assist with effective and safe braking. The Sherman S really needs front power pads to pull acceleration and power from the motor. I found this challenging because I didn't use front power pads on my InMotion V11. I really liked the freedom in cornering and for sitting and standing. So this was a large learning curve for me. Leaperkim provide power pads out of the box. They are decent starters, but I recommend you look at getting something more substantial. I say this because I found them to be rounded, too thin, and my legs wanted to slip out of them. But by making sure that I clamped the pads with my legs, they were effective, just not great. They are also missing the jump pad portion, which is this pad over your foot. This locks you in over jumps and large bumps. These are the pads I had on when my feet slipped out and I crashed. If I had on more substantial pads, I reckon that entire incident would have been avoided. Part of the complication and difficulty of learning the Sherman S is that it hurt and caused me pain. The top of the shell isn't contoured and will dig into your leg, particularly noticed when mounting and riding one-legged. Obviously the best fix is just to place some thick foam. I was forced to use front power pads, which I wasn't familiar. During seated riding, they twisted my ankles in an uncomfortable way and created ankle pain. The main solution is to work my feet out from the pads a little bit to alleviate the strain. This definitely detracts from some of the enjoyment from seated riding that I enjoyed on the V11. As a compromise, I have to either run soft or medium pedal hardness in the Sherman S settings. I've been running soft and medium pedal hardness as this is a bit more casual and comfortable. Hard mode is rock solid, and I found it makes the wheel a bit twitchier than I like, causing more wobbles. The wheel weight is significantly heavier and requires more force from my legs and feet. They weren't up to the task. The double combo of sore ankles and painful legs standing meant riding was overall uncomfortable and at times painful. Although the benefit is that now I've got stronger legs and have mostly grown out of these pain points. On all of these settings, there's been zero pedal dipping that I've heard other veteran EUCs can suffer from. So just riding through a storm at the moment, pretty big downpour. I'm going for maybe an hour, and it's just a good feeling to be able to keep using the EUC even in the rain. After the waterproofing, got the plastic bag cover on top, so a little protection still, and yeah, really liberating. It's a bit of fun as well. How an EUC handles the rain is one of the most important features for me, since I intend to replace my car trips with it. The Sherman S was downright dangerous in the rain due to the footplates becoming incredibly slippery. Check out my footplate video for a more in-depth analysis. Other than that, I found it was confidence inspiring to ride in the rain. The solid cruising ability of the Sherman S meant the stability and traction from the excellent suspension. This, coupled with plenty of power, allows the wheel to push through the extra water resistance. The mudguard has done a good job at keeping water and dirt off of me during wet conditions. However, it can't come close to the V11 mudguard. The stock waterproofing is decent, but the more I looked at it, the more I was disappointed. For heavy conditions, it's still best to use a bag cover over the top of the wheel. And as always, take care if you decide to ride in the rain. I'll go into more details in the upcoming wheel reviews section. I often ride at night time, so the lights of an EUC are incredibly important for me. Firstly, there isn't any daytime running light, so I just use the main light during the day. The headlight is within easy reach to turn on and adjust the angle while riding. It's powerful, and I find that it's good up to about 50 kilometers an hour, but it's very directional and has a bright central beam. It's very blinding for everyone since it doesn't have a cutoff beam. I added this aftermarket shield to see if it would help. After testing with someone, they said the only thing that helped was to aim the light down a lot more than I wanted, since it doesn't have enough horizontal throw and means I'm turning into darkness. I recommend combining an additional helmet light. I added this 1000 lumen Raveman, which features a cutoff beam, which is great to avoid blinding the shit out of others. Having a helmet light makes a huge difference, seeing through corners and any upcoming branches or spiders. Getting a spider through the opening in my helmet kind of scares the crap out of me. The front light seems fairly modular and should be easy to replace if you want.
Those are the two laser lights there, and this button for the laser lights is really horrible to press. I don't touch it.
The rear light is serviceable, but I don't really like it. I prefer it to be larger, brighter, and blink under braking instead of simply lighting up. It does have turning indicators when leaning the EUC over, although I'm not sure how useful this is for other road users. There is a dangerous feature where the rear light can be turned off with a press of the power button and it doesn't make any sound to alert you, meaning I've accidentally turned off the rear light and been riding blind with 0 rear lights without knowing. Now we get to the gimmick, the rear lasers. At first I thought they were ridiculous, but I've come around and like them now. At first one side didn't work, but after pressing the crappy button a few times, they've been working well ever since. I don't think they do anything for visibility, it's just swag. I've added reflective tape around the wheel to improve the passive visibility, sticking to the convention here in Australia of white for the front and red for the rear. And I've come out to this private road so that I can safely do it. Speed and acceleration test. One of the most important safety factors is braking, of course. So I like EV's format of the 25 and 50 kilometer benchmarks. Don't get me wrong, as you've seen, the Sherman S claps. So what could I possibly have to complain about? Well, the wheel feels a bit heavy and sluggish, unwilling to accelerate or brake, and this is particularly noticeable when pushing hard as I do. At higher cruising speeds, I need to have my weight up on the front of the pedals or be pushing into my power pads to keep it cruising. This is one of the reasons why I prefer seated riding at higher speeds. When it comes to the high speed, I hear first beeps at 80.5 kilometers on the wheel, which is 7% over the GPS corrected value. This is with high speed mode on. However, the Sherman S feels heavy and slow to stop under braking. Luckily, the grab handle is exceptionally well placed, and cranking back on that really helps to settle it down. I've accidentally overpowered it one time going downhill while braking hard with the grab handle. Under normal conditions, it has plenty of power to prevent being over-torqued. It took a fair while for me to eliminate most of the braking wobbles, but I still struggle with them from time to time, particularly at the top speeds. Luckily, if you do start to suffer wobbles under braking, it is possible to reach down and use the grab handle to steady the EUC, which I've had to do one time. I have to be conscious about applying exceptional braking technique every time, which is sinking down and into the rear power pads with my arms out in front, and even using the grab handle from time to time. First battery run down, I'm on 6% now, going quite slow, and there's the beeps, letting me know I'm getting low. Pretty dodgy underfoot, it's kind of dipping on me, so I think I'll just wrap it up there. Yeah, the wheel's so flat now it won't even self-balance, check this out. Rightio, that's a third battery depletion and we're reading 136.2 kilometers on the wheel. This many GPS corrected. I used low mode for a few. So I've noticed after turning low battery mode on that the wheel beeps have stopped and I'm no longer getting a 25 km/h beep as well. And the tilt back is gone. But of course, you know, you're eating into your safety margin, so ride with caution. Low battery mode did the job last few Ks to get back, and yeah, it's 74 volts, so I really don't want to push it. So definitely an option for in a pinch, but bad for your battery health, so I don't do it all the time. So have a look what happens when I turn low battery mode off. That's some serious tilt back. Yeah, but then if we turn low mode back on, wheel levels out and we limp home. Now bear with me here, truthfully I think range tests are kind of useless since they are so variable. However, I can tell you I was surprised with my low numbers. 110 kilometers GPS range. That's on the street tyre and fairly flat terrain. This may seem low, seeing as it's perfect battery conditions here and I'm a light rider. When you consider the extra high speeds that the Sherman S can go, which really drains the battery. Simply riding a bit slower drastically increases the range you can expect with any electric unicycle. A good metric is that I'm getting about 2 times what I did on the InMotion V11. Some actually helpful things I can say is that the Sherman S cruises at 55 kilometers an hour all the way to 3% battery. At 10% battery, the speaker will intermittently start beeping. Interestingly, I've noticed the battery percent is extremely unreliable after taking a break and turning off the wheel. It rebounds up to 10% when turned back on, but this is fake capacity that quickly evaporates back to the percentage. So I've just finished my whole morning filming on the one battery. I'm at about 50% charge now. That was over about 40 kilometers of just hammering it, maximum lean. Could have just kept going. I love that about this Sherman S. This has just unlocked so much freedom and exploration. For any new riders out there thinking of getting the Sherman S as their first wheel, I just have a few safety tips for you since this is such a fast wheel. So here's a quick list of things that you should consider. Don't chase a top speed and learn the capabilities slowly. At higher speeds, you can get extreme death wobbles instantly. This section of the video shifts the discussion to what it's like owning the Sherman S. Now, I've had it for quite a while now, so I'm past the honeymoon phase, which means there are quite a few issues that I'd like to shed light on. I took a gamble with a batch 1 and have been overall really impressed. However, there are quite a few quirks that need to be resolved, and at this price point, I would have liked to have had that sorted from the get-go. Keep in mind that I'm coming from InMotion V11, and now the Sherman S have both been car replacers for me for mid to long range journeys. So overall, the wheel gives a feeling of ruggedness and reliability, and it's quite utilitarian. And so starting off with how it sounds, there's a bit of a grunt to the motor at low speeds and then a whine at higher speeds as well. And then on big hits, the suspension really has this sort of sound that you get used to after a while. And you just know it's such a solid build because it doesn't squeak or creak when you're riding. It has developed some around the footplates, but I just have to diagnose what's causing that exactly, if it's the nylon ove or... Now the motor's not as smooth as my V11. It's got a bit of a chunk to it when idling, so that means it's sort of, you can feel the magnets clicking from one to the other when you're sitting at stoplights or just standing still. Now this is a pretty damn heavy wheel at about 45 kilograms, but that doesn't mean it's very portable. So I have taken it shopping with the trolley handle that so many people hate. It's got a lot of flex to it and it doesn't fit your hand very well. But if you're just going around the shops, it's fine. But I found off-road, if you're trying to push it over a log or something, then hell no, you don't want to be pushing on that trolley handle. It's got a lot of flex and you're better off using the grab handle for that. Now I've made my seat small enough that I can fit the helmet over the top when I'm shopping, and that's really convenient. If I go for a bigger Sur-on seat or something like that, then won't be an option anymore, which will be missing out a little bit. Damn, that's a good kickstand. Just chuck it down anywhere and it stays. Now this kickstand is just so rock solid. I love it. You just chuck it down, forget about it. It's good on just about everything. I don't think it's ever fallen over on the kickstand, which has been amazing. And then I love how exposed the rim is because I can just throw a lock through there when I'm shopping. I've got a folding lock that I use, and that's really convenient. Now there's no kill switch or lifting switch on this one, and to be honest, I haven't really missed it. If I'm lifting this up, I want to power it down because I don't want that wheel spinning up on me by mistake. Now I've been really quite surprised at how well it's fit into different cars. I've used a Kia Picanto and gotten that into the boot and behind the passenger seat. Now it's pretty bloody heavy to lift in, but you can see that it fits pretty well. And you know, I'm not a big guy and I've been able to handle it around. I've also fitted into a Mitsubishi Mirage. That's also another small car. Now back to the kickstand, yeah, it's just so rock solid, love it. And I was worried that it might hit curbs or stairs going down, but I haven't clipped anything with it yet, so it's been not a problem. Now I went through a few stages with the Tyre, and I've got the own video for it, of course, but I got the stock Kenda K2. I've got quite a few comments about a hybrid tyre, the Hardness K66, and that looks like a really good hybrid option. Then the star of the show is obviously the suspension. Wow, it's just so awesome. It's got 12 clicks of compression and 18 clicks of rebound damping. And then you also have the preload spring as well if you just want to stiffen it up for the initial preload. Now I went for the heavier 80 kilogram plus spring, and I'm finding fully geared up, I'm getting around that 35 millimeters of sag, which is spot on to what I want, since you typically want to target around 30% of your suspension travel in sag. Now I picked up the Houlage aftermarket clickers so I can adjust the rebound on the fly. That's the sort of thing that I couldn't do with the air suspension, and so little maintenance on it that, yeah, I'll get to that later. Another part that I had huge problems with are the footplates, and of course it has its own video as well. Now the footplate height is pretty far off the ground, but coming from the V11 it wasn't a problem for me, and I nearly forgot to even mention it in the video. I'm just so used to it now, so yeah, just really become climatized to the high footplates. And that has the awesome benefit of never hitting curbs or rocks. I've never scraped a pedal, so a lot of benefits as well. Because the Sherman S body is wider, I did hit some poles trying to fit through a gap, so yeah, that was one thing that happened. Now this is the stock seat that comes with the Sherman S, and it's so pitiful, and of course I have the own video here going into the seat. My seat replacement has just actually fallen apart, so it lasted a couple months, around 2,000 kilometers. So looking at other options, which would be the Suron seat with the slow and low installation guide, which would be nice to follow. And there's also some really good community DIY solutions using foam, so you can sculpt your own if you want as well. Now, the side of the shell is quite large and flat, which is really nice for fitting any sort of pads to the wheel. You just chuck your Velcro on there and you're pretty good to go. I did have to cut out the screw holes so I don't have to rip the Velcro off every time, so that's a handy little tip. There are these raised sections I was a bit worried about. I thought I might have to grind them down, but they haven't been in the way yet, and those are just decorative. So I just wanted a quick fire, 3 good things, 3 bad things. So the wheel is so easy to turn on. You can just turn it on while it's on the kickstand, and not a problem. It turns on every time. The tyre valve stem is so easy to connect to. You just chuck any sort of hose on there and it's so accessible. And then the grab handles have just been fantastic for moving the wheel around. Hard braking, you can just grab onto it, wrench it back. And also transitioning from seated to standing, you can just use that handle to steady yourself, and it's so accessible. And now 3 bad things about it is that the shell goes straight up to my leg and digs right in, so I've had to put foam on the sides to ease that up. There's no lift switch, but I don't really care about that. I turn it off just when I'm moving around or setting it down on the kickstand. And an interesting one is that all the speaker beeps are the same. So when you turn it on, it sounds the same. The headlights the same. The speed alarms are the same beeps. Now the app for this is pretty dismal. It's bare bones, and besides that, it's difficult to get. It's not on the Play Store, so I had a short video here describing how to get it. And I needed that to get the update for the firmware to enable the high speed mode. All right, let's work through the Leaperkim app. So the UI is pretty old school looking. It's not very flash. It's got the basics. Now these buttons down here, I'm not sure what they are because they're out of the screen, so I can't get to them. And that's just part of the jank of this app. When we go across, we got some of the stats. Go up into the settings info. This tells you the firmware. Change the units from miles per hour to kilometers per hour. Check for firmware updates. I'm not going to click that since I'm out riding. I don't want to possibly cause an issue. Disconnect device. So I might do that since I'm going into EUCWorld. So this is my go-to riding app. So you're probably familiar with it. It's got your live data. And then go up to the hamburger menu here. So here's where I input the wheel speed correction and distance factor at -7%. That's just from my own testing. So that means the wheel odometer is reporting about 7% too much. Honestly, I don't mess with any of this besides the alarms. And I'll just flick through and show you what I'm using at the moment. Now, I'm no expert on this, and I'm sure there's probably a better and safer way to do it. Now, it's a good thing that the screen is so capable because you can do everything through the screen. So I use that for my trip odometer, changing the beep speed. Now, it's interesting because it jumps up pretty sharply up to about 60 k's an hour, and then you can't put it to anything besides 280. But it's not actually turned off at that point. I still, as you could see in the high speed test, was getting beeps, around the 70 to 80 kilometer hour mark. So they're never off. And if you're someone that rides the beeps, I don't recommend this, but you can easily remove the speaker and just not have it beep at you constantly. But of course, you 100% need a different warning system, maybe EUCWorld through a speaker. One feature that I'm really missing is the split riding mode, which is you can set how much it tilts under braking and also acceleration separately, because otherwise we only have the soft, medium and hard mode, and hard mode is rock solid. The pedals are so stable. Too stiff for me. I normally ride around medium, just gives it a little bit more comfort. And I've never noticed any sort of pedal dipping in turns or over bumps, so that's been really nice. The next section is about the Sherman S safety. And since I started this video, I've made a purchase for this new helmet. And surprisingly, it does impact the safety in a negative way. And because it's so well insulated, I can't hear the wheel beeps very well. And if I add music on top of that, there's no chance of hearing the wheel beeps. Normally I'd say, yeah, just use EUCWorld and speakers, but the Sherman S wheel alarms aren't transmitted to EUCWorld. So this is a big problem. If you would like a helmet review video by itself, leave a comment below. But now I'll get back to the wheel review. Now when it comes to safety on the Sherman S, I've found that it's okay. The beeps are always on, really loud. I've always been able to hear them, so that's been great. The tilt back can be turned off and on, but I found it to be more of a hindrance than a help. So the tilt back comes on kind of gradually and then tips you up, and I really hated it. I enjoyed it on the InMotion V11, but it's feels a lot different on the Sherman S, and it's terrible, so I just turned it right off. So the power of this one has meant, yeah, I've never had any sort of overpowering issues accelerating. I did recently overpower it braking down a hill using the grab handle, really hanging off the back. So that's the only time, but yeah, I haven't really overpowered it otherwise. And you know, it's got the big 20-inch wheel with the suspension, so it just rolls over little bumps and potholes, and because the suspension is so good, the wheel's just planted, you know, so much more than the V11, and it keeps the traction on, and yeah, super steady. So of course the most disappointing thing is the footplates, which did cause my crash, so I knocked that in the safety category. So the stock water resistance is decent. I mean, the most important part, the battery, is pretty well sealed, so that's the most critical component, but then the water resistance drops off after that, and I'll get into that later on. So I put the handles in the safety category because that allows you to lift it safely and without hurting yourself. I find that there's not really any pinch points for your fingers in the suspension, so that's good, there's no amputation hazards. Speaking of overpowering it, the battery feels like this deep reservoir that it can draw from. So when you're talking about battery sag and crashes caused by that, it just feels like it's such a deep reservoir of the battery that it's just not been an issue. Now when it comes to charging this one, the flap can be operated one-handed and plugged in. I've heard quite a few people mention this as a weak point, but you know, it's up the top and facing you, so that's really handy. And the flap stays shut and seems to be pretty watertight. From dead flat, I did count it at 7 hours 42 minutes from 76 volts to 101.3 volts. And now I do have a complaint about the charging brick. It does have a fan that's on all the time, so yeah, that could be a bit annoying, and plus it's a wearing part. So I'll just walk you around the wheel showing you some of the accessories that I've added to it. Of course, I have my DIY seat, which is crucial for long range cruising. These are the suspension dial adjusters, have been really, really handy. Love them. I've added this padding at the top to cushion the ride, which is essential, particularly for mounting, dismounting, one-wheeled riding. These are the Kinetic Nylonove version 1 power pads, and yeah, for a big EUC, it's really essential to have some sort of pads. The Nylonove with overlays, footplates, and yeah, these are just my favorite because of the adjustability, so got my own video going over those. Now this headlight, as you saw in the riding review, it's quite blinding, so I did get this little shade here to try and cut it off at the top, and I asked someone to watch me coming and it didn't really help. You still need to just point it at the ground. And of course the Michelin Pilot Street 2 tyre, which I have my own video about, but yeah, it's really good carving. And then something that you can't see is all the waterproofing that I've done, so I'll be getting into that in a minute. And the other modification I added, of course, was the reflective tape, which is the red and white tape around. Now, a big draw card for me towards the Sherman S was not having air suspension, which means it's so easy on the maintenance, and it's incredible. You can just walk down to the garage, jump on the wheel, and it's been ready to go pretty much every time. So that means the only maintenance I need to do on it is just, you know, tyre pressure check maybe once a week, put a few PSI in it, and just good to go again. Love it. Now, of course, because it's an oil on spring suspension, I probably need to service that maybe once a year, something like that, and hopefully you can just take it to a bike shop to get it done. Not sure how much that'll cost. And another draw card when speaking of build quality is that Leaperkim's backing up the Sherman S with a 2-year warranty. So that's, you know, top of the game, and just shows they have confidence in their product and inspires me to sink that much money into a big wheel. Now, speaking of build quality, I found it was more impressive in person than on the videos that I was seeing. It's just with that hard magnesium shell, rock solid. Yeah, it just feels well put together and thought out. Well balanced front to back, although perhaps a bit top heavy. All the bolts were firm, although, you know, they did loosen up after a few rides and needed checking. And then surprisingly, a couple had Loctite and a couple didn't, so yeah, it does need a little extra help there. Now, one area that was lacking and a bit disappointing was the footplate pins came rusty. Now, I saw one reviewer talking about the plastic inside the shell here and asking why that wasn't a higher quality like metal or something. And there's a good reason given for that, and that's because should something go wrong with the battery and they catch fire, you don't want a pressure vessel and fully enclosed battery case, because that's then going to be an explosive. So having a plastic interior will allow that to quickly melt and dissipate that energy without creating a bomb. Now, this rim looks rock solid and it's been so good for me. Not a problem. I haven't seen any issues reported on the forums, but of course your biggest defense is to run a decent PSI. I've only been on 30 PSI, but coupled with the suspension, that's been quite enough, and haven't dinged it yet. Now, it's not a hollow bore motor design, which is many people's favourites for being the strongest, easy power cable access for the motor. But it does have the downsides of having a larger surface area for the bearings, which allows water to get in and stuff them up. But as you can see from the videos, that the axle on this is friggin' massive, and I don't see it being a problem. Yeah, really impressive. So a really important topic for me is the waterproofing on the Sherman S. So one stock complaint is that the mainboard housing doesn't have a rubber gasket. I mean, that seems pretty basic and should be included on all EUCs by now, I reckon. The stock waterproofing is decent, where it's really needed around the batteries, but it needs a lot of help everywhere else. I'd say for light rain, it's fine out of the box, and I have ridden stock setup in light rain, but for me to be confident in heavy rain, then I needed to modify quite a bit. So my initial waterproofing measures was when I did the tyre change, and so I siliconed the motherboard housing, and then the front charge ports were siliconed as well, just in case the rubber flap falls off. And then around the top here, I just added a bit more silicone up around the top of the case where the cables run in. I was speaking to John Wall about this, and he had bearing problems, and his rear light broke from water damage, so still pretty variable between riders. And even after modification, I've been wearing a bag on mine just over the top to give me 100% confidence in torrential downpours, because you know that is a fair bit of water. So just finished about an hour or 26 kilometers at rain riding, heavy rain riding, and I got the rain cover on. So let's peel it off and have a look underneath. Look at that, nice and dry on the display, and just leave it for a bit. But after one of these heavy rains, I turned it on and the speaker was squealing at me. When I opened it up, I discovered that while the front headlight unit is really well sealed, the speaker's just hanging on the back, fully exposed to the elements. So I just jerry-rigged this dodgy bag on it to improve the water resistance. And then it's just got a little 3.5mm speaker jack connection, so I siliconed that as well, but John was suggesting that dielectric grease is probably a better option for that waterproofing connection, With the build quality and waterproofing, I can't know how well the EUC is holding up unless we tear it down. So let's do that now. Let me pull you away for a minute to this long-term teardown. Now the point of this is to check for loose bolts, how well the waterproofing is held up, and also want to try and straighten the tyre when I reassemble it. The main concern that I found was right up on the motor bolts with some rust, and then I could see the sand accumulation on the power cable, that water has been tracking its way down in towards the motor, but it's been siliconed. I just went over it again with silicone. That was after I cleaned and greased the bearings and the bearing seals, which were in great condition and looked like they'd been really keeping the water out. I pulled off one side of the battery to check that it's been holding itself watertight, and it looks really good in there. It's got it's black silicone around, so I just re-siliconed that up and fixed it back down. Not going to check the other battery compartments. And thanks to Matt with this question, he mentions these rectangular cutouts on the suspension supports. So I'm going to also plug up the gaps, and I've just used a piece of black plastic, siliconed around it, and then let that cure. So that's going to stop water splashing in towards the suspensions, the lower suspension, and that's just going to keep everything just a bit more water resistant. Oh, I just want to jump in here and say I was checking the motor bolts, and one or two or a couple were concerningly loose and there was no Loctite on them, so definitely need to keep an eye on that. I did note there was some rubbing on the case. And check out this plastic edge on the screw holes, sort of wearing a bit thin. That's pretty minor, I reckon, so just a bit of something to note there. Suspension sliders themselves looks in perfect condition, nothing to report. So as I'm reassembling it, I'm just going to be using lots of Loctite and another bead of silicone around the main board casing to make it really water resistant. Now, when I was tightening down the chassis bolts here and here, I twisted the tyre in the opposite direction to try and take out that left bias, and maybe a tiny bit, but it still seems to be further to the left. Overall, very happy with Leaperkim's veteran Sherman S build quality. Great, and that's the end of the 2,000 kilometre teardown. Back to the main wheel review. So what surprised me with the second teardown was just how easy it was. I found the Sherman is really quite simple to work on the second time. So yeah, that's great benefit. Now, the veteran Sherman S is a bloody expensive EUC here in Australia, around 6,100 Australian dollars. And how the hell do I justify that? Well, luckily I live in a beautiful area and riding is fantastic, so that's a massive benefit, and that has meant I was confident selling my car last year to help pay for this, and this is my vehicle now for mid to long range trips. I just got a quick few testimonials here. So John Wall says, Sherman S is definitely my favourite wheel ridden yet, just needs the good pedals. Darren Boone says, exactly, I can't get over the suspension of the Sherman S. It's amazing, and since I cruise at around 25 miles per hour, it's nice that I have a larger buffer than the V11 if I needed. Brenton Porter asks, are you happy you've changed your pre-order from the V13? At the time, yes, I was extremely happy, but having found that it needs footplates replacements, the seat was trash, that kind of soured me on it a fair bit, but I've been really happy with it so far, and you know, the battery is friggin' massive. But surprisingly, yeah, I could do with more power. Maxime asks, have you kept your V11? Should you have kept your V11? I did keep my V11 and I haven't ridden it really since. I did it once just to compare the ride, and yeah, it feels so light and nimble, and it's just really fun to nip around on the bike paths, footpaths, more suited for that sort of slower riding. But that's going to be its own video coming out later. And then the real question is the Sherman S worth it with these other wheels coming out? Well, it's a bit strange that Leaperkim is undercutting their own product with the Paton at 126 volts. It makes me wonder why they couldn't make the Sherman S 126 volts. Bit disappointing. And the main competitor now is the EX30. From what I've seen, it sounds like the power is awesome and it just gives you a much more natural and easy riding experience because the power is so accessible. But if I'm only going to have one big wheel and it's replacing my car, I need something that's rock solid, reliable and safe. And I'm just not sure that Begode has convinced me they're there yet. I will be getting a test ride on it in a couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for that video. So does the veteran Sherman S do what I need as a vehicle class electric unicycle? Yes, overall it's a great package. However, as you've seen, it needed a fair bit of help to get it to the standard that I wanted. At 2 times the price of my V11, is it 2 times the fun? Hell no. But it gets me to my destination a lot faster, safer, and with a huge battery reserve. The 100-volt system on this wheel leaves it feeling a bit heavy, and you have to coax it up to speed and under braking. Makes me wonder, with the announcement of the veteran Paton 126-volt system, why this behemoth is being left behind at 100 volts. Cheers everyone, ride safe, and I'll see you next time.
Something's gonna bring the change. Journeys we are meant to take. Something at the edge of space, calling us to fly.